Okay, good evening everyone, and welcome to this evening's event, Bringing the Past to Life, the Science and Engineering Behind Old Ireland in Colour, which is being hosted by Engineers Ireland Thomond Region in association with the Engineers Ireland Electronic and Computing Division. My name is Mike Griffin, and I'm the chairperson of Engineers Ireland Thomond Region and a committee member of the Electronic and Computing Division. It's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker for this evening. John Breslin is a professor of electronic engineering at the University of Galway, where he's director of the Tech Innovate and Ag Innovate Entrepreneurship Masters programs. Associated with 3 Science Foundation Ireland research centres, he is co-principal investigator at Insight, Data Analytics, and Confirm, Smart Manufacturing, and a funded investigator at NUIG, an ag tech company. He's founder of the popular Irish websites, boards.ie. In fact, I spent many hours, if not weeks or months of my life on boards.ie, as well as adverts.ie, and a co-founder, non-executive director of the Galway City Innovation District, Portershed. He's also co-author of the 2 best-selling Old Ireland in Colour books. I'd like to remind our viewers tonight to please pose any questions in the Q&A box, not the chat box, and I'll direct these questions to John after the presentation is over. So with that, I'd like to hand you over now tonight to our speaker, John Breslin. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much, Mike, and thanks so much to you for the invite to give the talk this evening to Engineers Ireland Thomond Region. And thanks also to John in the background for the help tonight as well. So I'm delighted to be here this evening. I was telling Mike that my last talk to the Engineers Ireland Thomond Region was in 2009 on the then very popular topic of Web 2.0, but something slightly different tonight, which is a little bit of a story and the background to the Old Ireland in Colour project, and being Engineers Ireland, hopefully we'll talk a little bit about some of the technology as well. So I suppose Mike has already given my background, but just I suppose to mention that Old Ireland in Colour is a collaborative project with the historian Dr. Sarah Ann Buckley, and I'll talk later on about how this project came about. So it's really bringing together the technology. I suppose the techie side of things with the history and Sarah Ann's knowledge there as well. But as Mike mentioned, I've broad interest in, I suppose, technology coming from my engineering background in studying engineering in the University of Galway, and also I suppose in the day job teaching engineering, but also doing research in the whole computing area. So when I heard about the possibility of being able to colorize photographs using this new computer system that had come out, I was just hooked, and I'll tell you more about that later on. So I did a lot of research in the area of something called the semantic web, which is all about adding more data, more structured data to the web. And one of the people I follow on Twitter is a guy called Dan Brickley, he works for Google now. He develops their data structures, something called schema, which is data for the web, basically defining different terms and ways of describing data embedded in web pages. But anyway, I saw this tweet from Dan, completely unrelated to semantic web, which was about something called DeOldify. And it was actually an earlier tweet, which I couldn't find again, but this is around the same time. And it basically, he posted a link to the system that showed how you could automatically colorize old black and white photographs using this AI system. And I tried it out and I was hooked. I think the first thing I tried out actually was a video, because they had a system for colorizing video and for colorizing photographs. And the picture on the right-hand side is a screenshot of the first video I shared using this DeOldify system. And I found an old British Pathé movie of Galway Market from 1937. And I ran it through the DeOldify video colorization system, and I just was amazed at the results, and so were many people who saw it online. So, and by the way, I mentioned I'm based in Galway, but I'm also I'm from County Clare, so I'm from the Thomond region. So again, a little link to the region where we're in today as well. So because I'm living in Galway, I said, you know what, I'm going to try more of these videos and images from around Galway. And I just started sharing more and more colorized photographs on my own social media account. So that was kind of the start of the story. Now, because I started becoming, I suppose, a kind of a power user of the system, I got in touch with the people who developed the DeOldify platform. And it was actually created by, at the time, a programmer who worked with an insurance company called Jason Antic. And Jason was trying to develop his skills in the whole area of deep learning, as it's called. I'll say a little bit more about it later on. And he took a course called fast.ai, which is developed by developed to help people to develop their AI and deep learning skills. And as a project that he decided to tackle for his course he was taking, the Fast AI course, he said, I'm going to look at the colorization of old black and white photographs. And he basically went head on into this and developed the DeOldify system. So DeOldify kind of does what the name says. It takes old photographs and I suppose makes them look a little bit newer by adding color to them. And I was fortunate enough to actually be at a meeting in San Diego in June 2019. And I met up with Jason and also with Dana Kelly, who joined the DeOldify team. And with Jason, they developed DeOldify into a commercial project. And we had a great chat about their plans for that and also some of the stuff I've been doing with DeOldify. So that's just a little bit of background. So what is it? So DeOldify it's a software system. It's an open source software system, I should say. So people can actually download this, install it on their own machines, modify it and update it for their own purposes. And it uses AI, or a specific type of AI, which is called deep learning, which is an advanced form of machine learning to colorize photographs. And how it works basically is the system is fed a bank with hundreds of thousands of color photographs, plus their corresponding black and white versions. And it uses this to train and to develop a model which basically recognizes a mapping between shapes and textures and objects in color, in the color versions, and the shapes and textures and so on in the black and white versions. And based on this model it develops, it's then able to add color to a new image that it hasn't seen before. So you basically, it learns from these, as a big bank of color images and their black and white versions. And then when it's given a new image it hasn't seen before, it's able to add color to that image based on its model. So it's a fascinating system. And as I said, it's open source. So I have some links later on where people can actually go to see the source code, or you can go to use it to colorize photographs, or if you want to, you can colorize videos with it as well. And I have a link to a tutorial video on that as well that I did a few years ago. Now, the whole area of deep learning is, it's really impacting our lives in many ways. And anytime you use, a voice recognition system, or, self-driving or, assisted driving vehicles, many of them now are using some form of deep learning. And deep learning is basically a computing framework that is based on the idea of being able to simulate the way our brains work. So, for many years, people have been trying to use systems based on neural networks. There's, I suppose, two main approaches to computing for AI have been sort of rule-based systems, where you basically develop a series of algorithms or rules to do something, or machine learning or these new deep learning systems that basically learn from data. They learn patterns and learn how to do stuff by looking at existing data. And this is a book that I actually have here beside me called the Deep Learning Revolution, but it's written by one of the pioneers of deep learning, which in itself is related to computer science and neuroscience and so on. But what's interesting is that people have been thinking about this for quite a long time, like over a quarter of a century. But actually what's made it possible is the fact that we are now at a point where computing systems can actually do so much more computing power, and more abilities to deal with large amounts of data as well. So I liked a couple of quotes here, and I just highlight a couple of words here. But the person who wrote this book basically said, 1989, he kind of was working on the frameworks that underlie many of deep learning systems that are in use today, but just the computing power wasn't there at the time. And he used Moore's law to try and figure out when would that happen, and he calculated what happened in 2015. And it's actually been since around 2015, 2016, 2017 that actually a lot of deep learning frameworks have emerged. And it's essentially just because the computing frameworks have allowed us to create neural networks that are in some way closer to that of a brain, not the same standards you see in the last paragraph there. Human brain would have, perhaps 100 billion neurons and many million billion synaptic connections. But we now can actually simulate a neural network with at least billions of connections and millions of neurons or units corresponding to neurons. So the time of deep learning and deep learning being applied to many different types of applications has arrived. A lot of ones are in the area of computer vision, a lot of ones in speech processing, text processing, and so on. Becomes a lot more feasible using deep learning frameworks. So the particular type of deep learning framework that DeOldify uses is something called a GAN. And a GAN uses basically two sets of neural networks. One is the initial one that is called the generator, which produces the initial version of an output. And the second is called the critic, which basically looks at the output and says, no, it's not good enough. And it is there to criticize the output, and then that forces the generator to produce a better output as a result. And in this particular case, the GAN is being used for generating colorizations, but can be used for many different purposes. And I'll mention one or two other applications of GANs later on. So GAN, Generative Adversarial Network, as I say, consists of these two parts: the generator, which does the initial deep learning output, and then the critic, which forces the generator to create a better output, essentially. And I have a link here again. You can click on these links later on to read more on the background as well. And the results for DeOldify, at least, which is based on GANs, is that you get an output which is a bit more realistic than the first iteration would have been. So, as I said, you can download and install this code yourself freely. And I did this on my own machine at home, because when I started colorizing photographs, I did a few, and it takes a little while to process. But as you start to do more and more, and you want to process more files, you want to either automate it or maybe kind of ramp up the ability to be able to do more and more. If you want to do videos, it takes more computing power, so you'll probably need to figure out, do you do this in the cloud? Do you do it on a local machine? So I had bought an old gaming machine, which you can see down here in the picture, a few years ago. And I basically installed my own version of Linux, downloaded DeOldify, and was able then to mass colorize images by just firing them at this installed system. And I used a system called Flickr Dump, which basically downloads images from Flickr, which is a popular photo sharing website, to see how many images I could process from various archives and online libraries that are freely available. And you can see there in the second last bullet point there, I had 20,000 images done in a couple of hours. So you can actually achieve quite a lot through the system. And it's quite amazing to think about the fact you could create a colorized photograph, and not only just one, but 20,000 of them in a couple of hours, using such a framework that is freely available. Especially when you think of the amount of effort that this would have taken, years ago in terms of colorizing a photograph. Now, they may not be perfect, but I'm going to talk more later on about that and what can be done as well, and what's happening to make these colorizations even better. But just shows you, I suppose, what can be done. The thing I didn't mention here, it's in the first line there, is the fact that these computing systems typically use GPUs, and GPUs are graphical processing units. So the main use of GPUs was or is traditionally for playing computer games. So you've got these, additional computing systems which have, potentially 7 to 12 billion transistors on them, but they are ideally suited towards training of neural network systems, but also for running the models that have been trained afterwards as well. And this is why you can do so much so quickly compared to what was possible in the past. So one of my research team, Rory Ward, who's also electronic engineering graduate, electronic computer engineering graduate, actually from the university, is working on the video side of things, and he's a PhD researcher funded by the SFI CRT AI. I put a link in here to his Twitter account where he's sharing some of the outputs. These are some early Irish motion pictures from the early 20th century that he's colorizing. He's tackling different problems in terms of image flicker and variation colors between frames. So video colorization is quite an interesting area, and when you get the results right, it can be quite impressive. So now, I did say to you earlier on that AI is, I suppose, a part of the puzzle, and I think it's fair to say that AI can get you so far, or deep learning systems can get you so far, but the big work is in making sure, as much as you can, that the colors that you have as a result are a bit more accurate. So I have a video, and again, you can get the link to this later on, or you can find it on YouTube under the Old Ireland Colour account, which shows just some of the behind the scenes in terms of colorizing a photograph. And this particular one is one that you can see has a lot of detail. It's from the second sitting of the Dáil in 1922, and it shows the sitting of the Dáil, which was at that time was held in the Mansion House in the Round Room in Dublin, and there's a huge amount of detail. So you can't tell, I suppose, exactly what clothes people were wearing, but you have to kind of make an estimate. And again, I'll talk later on about what approaches you can do towards that. However, there are some known features in even a picture like this. Now, there are paintings of this particular scene in the Dáil, and you'll see various colorizations that kind of say, we base this on the painting. But a lot of the paintings were done many years after the Dáil had actually sat. So again, they may not be accurate representations of what's in the picture. But in the background of the picture, there's actually all these, you can see these portraits here. And I went through the portraits, and I found out that the portraits are all pictures of Lord Mayors of Dublin. And I managed to find a great book, which is called the Dublin, sorry, the video's kind of coming in and out here, but it's called the Dublin Civic Portrait Collection. And it actually has photographs of these paintings, which are in the background. In the middle, it's Parnell, and then there's Daniel O'Connell and other Lord Mayors of Dublin. So I went through these anyway to try and find the actual colors for the paintings, and I was able to use those in the colorization. So you can imagine the process here. You get a black and white picture, you run it through the DeOldify system, you get an output that's in color, but it needs to be adjusted, it needs to be enhanced, it needs to be fixed. There might be, especially with a picture like this where you've got hundreds of people in it, some faces will be colorized, some won't. There's some kind of maybe partially obscure people where a hand may appear in color, another one may not. You've got variation in clothes, it doesn't look quite right. And then you're trying to kind of make sure the other features look okay, like the curtains in the background, the statues. You won't be able to see this on many of your screens here, but in the middle of the picture where the little YouTube icon is, behind it, there's actually a mirror that's reflecting the audience in the background. So there's a huge amount of detail here. There's portraits in the background of all of these Lord Mayors, and behind the portraits is actually coats of arms of all of the previous Lord Mayors of Dublin. So I would have gone through all of the coats of arms to try and figure out who are they, what family are they, what color should they be. So in the video, as I say, that goes into it in more detail if you want to see some of the work that goes on behind the scenes. The main point is, it's not a simple matter of throwing images into some AI system and suddenly it comes out as the final product. There can be hours, there can be days, there can be many, maybe even weeks spent trying to touch up or complete the colors in a picture. The AI does a great job in terms of getting it to a base level that you could then work on top of. And I think many people think that this is kind of the state of the art in terms of computer assisted colorization. The people who developed DeOldify actually have a couple projects that do this same approach, where they do an AI colorization and then use Photoshop on top of that as well. So point I wanted to make is it's a combination of computer and human making these final results. And same for pretty much all of the images in the old Iron in Colour books. They would have been put through this process. So anyway, how did the kind of the books and so on come about? So I shared out a couple of pictures on social media, a couple of videos, mainly around Galway. It got so popular that I said, I need to set up a separate dedicated social media account for this. And I created this brand, if you want to call it that, Old Ireland in Colour. There's many TV shows like World War II in Colour and so on. So I would have just kind of adapted the name from that. And by about early 2020, when obviously we were unaware of what was coming down the road, the social media accounts have got quite a number of followers. And then when COVID hit, I did some more colorizations. I was actually on sabbatical for 6 months. I was supposed to travel to various universities and I had research stays lined up. They all kind of fell by the wayside. So I had a bit more free time, and I then started talking to people about the possibility of doing a book. And I approached my colleague, Sarah Ann Buckley, who we hadn't met, but I sent her an email and said, would you be interested in doing a book? And this is actually the message I sent her, saying, I hope all is well. I'm running the Old Iron in Colour project. It's built up a lot of traction, but my knowledge of history is quite slim. And I wanted to see if you'd be interested in possibly co-writing a book. So that was a message in March 2020. So the social media account had built up, quite a lot of followers, and we knew there was interest out there. So that was kind of a good basis to kind of think, if we had a book, maybe people would be interested in buying it. And of course, we went to a number of publishers. We approached, I think, 4 publishers in April 2020, and we had offers from 3 of them pretty quickly, and we picked one and went with that. So it was an interesting year because obviously the whole idea of this book, it was kind of the first one, I suppose, of its type, but also because we were all stuck at home. We were trying to buy presents for family. It just, for many reasons, resonated and was the Christmas #1 in 2020. And then we followed up with a second book, Old Ireland in Colour 2, in 2021. So that's kind of the story about how it came about. But sales are great, and the kind of the reach it has been great. But I think it's the stories that are the most interesting, and the impact, and finding or hearing about people who found their family in pictures in the book is just fabulous. So this is probably one of our favorite ones because it's related to the cover of the first book, and you can see this picture of the 7 children there on the cover of Old Iron Colour. So funny story is that I'm involved in the Portershed. Portershed is our innovation hub in downtown Galway, where we have about 40 startups in Galway city centre. And the CEO of Portershed is Mary Rogers. And in Christmas 2020, Mary sent a copy of the book to her brother, who lives in New York. And the brother shared a picture on Facebook of the book sitting on a shelf with his friends. And a friend of his said, "Oh my God, I can't believe it. That's my mother who's on the picture of the book, on the cover of the book." So it turned out that the girl here, who I'm kind of moving the mouse around, so she's second from the right in the cover picture, is the mother of the friend of Mary Rogers' brother. So one of these kind of small world stories. Of course, we know Ireland is kind of a small world unto itself. But anyway, this is Kathleen Ryle, who lives in New York, and that's her in the photograph from it's kind of around in the 1930s, early 1940s. So anyway, it turned out that then a second person who Kathleen knew, which is Eileen, was also pictured on the cover of the book. This is her on the far right of the picture, and this is Eileen at the bottom. She lives in Chicago. And then we had the third person identified. So three of the 7 children are still living, and that is Sean, who's in Kerry. So just fascinating to kind of hear the story of the people behind the book. And again, if I flick through the book, you'd find so many stories of either people who are pictured or people whose ancestors or relations are pictured and have come back to us afterwards saying, you know, that's my mum's house, or that's my great uncle, or whatever. It's just been amazing to hear. So that's just a little bit about the story of the covers, and as I said, many stories about the people in the books. And I love the way people are kind of, you know, taking the pictures and sort of adapting it. Like the picture on the right is from Roisin Cura, who she's published 2 books of well, she published various things, but 2 books of sketches of Dublin and of Galway, and she just did an impromptu sketch of the 2 boys from the cover of the second book, which is from County Galway. So in 2020, I had the pleasure of being on the Late Late Show and talking to Ryan Tubridy about the first book. I think it may have been the only Late Late Show where I was the only person present, because there were so many pre-records. It was in the height of COVID. You know, I had to get a special pass to travel across the country. Yeah, it was quite unusual, no audience, but it got a great reaction, and you know, the pre-orders and sales, having spoken to various bookshops, their systems were ringing, let's say, after the appearance on the show, and just huge interest in the book. And then last year, 2 years ago, Sarah Ann was on with Ryan again, talking about some of the images in the second book. This picture in the bottom left, again, it's a fascinating one. It's from 1916 from Waterford, and just, I think when you see it in black and white and you see it in color, you just realize the amount of stuff that's going on, and the amount of detail in it, you know. And I was actually amazed at the things they were selling in 1916. They were selling, in the very front of the picture, there is little tins of Alaskan salmon, and I found the labels of the tins in an Alaskan library online, so I was able to use the colors from these labels to colorize those pictures of the tins of salmon. You've got bananas, and you've got Oxo and Pecan Freen biscuits and Cadbury's and fries and all different kind of brands. But again, just amazing the range of things they were selling in Waterford at this time in Mortimer's shop. Now, there's a whole debate around, you know, colorization, should we, shouldn't we? And I was watching some videos on YouTube last week about this, about related things. But, you know, I suppose the consensus from colorizers will be, you know, it's a supplement to what's going on. It kind of doesn't alter the original. The original is always there. You can always see it. It's not like, you know, colorizers are going around taking the original negatives and destroying them and ripping them up, or, you know, throwing them on a bonfire. The original is always there, and you would try and link to that, reference as much as possible. But there is definitely something about colorization that creates a stronger connection to the past, and it makes the past resonate a lot more with us. I think it also rejuvenates interest in our archives. And, you know, just before the session today, we were having a quick chat about, you know, family photographs, and, you know, the idea of taking old photographs and digitizing them and re-exploring, I suppose, what you have. And somebody rang me up 2 years ago saying that they had a collection of glass plate negatives that they'd found on a skip, and they'd saved from being destroyed, and they didn't really know what to do with them. And they'd read the Old Ireland Colour book, and they saw what was possible in terms of, you know, taking old photographs and enhancing and so on. So I put them in touch with the Tipperary Studies group at Tipperary County Council, and they donated the collection to them. And it's the most amazing set of pictures from shop fronts from around the Thomond region, for want of a better description, from Limerick, from Tipperary. I think there might be some in Clare, maybe some in Cork, but it's shop fronts, and primarily shop fronts taken in the, as far as I remember, the 1930s. And again, just something that kind of came about, and the connection came about because of the book, and just made somebody re-explore what they had, and I think really saved. Now there's a nice kind of a now and then thing going on, where Tipperary Studies people are showing the pictures of what it looked like in the 30s and now what it's like today. So that's some of the pros in terms of colorization, you know, making the connection to the past. Lots of dissenting voices. Well, not, I should say lots. There's a few dissenting voices who think it's, you know, distorting history, that it's kind of, you know, too subjective. But really, I found that the number of people who don't like colorization is quite small. it's important to say that, you know, the colorization process can only be as accurate as much research as you do. And for every photograph, you will be trying to do the best you can by it, if you want to put it that way. So I would do a lot of research into many aspects of a photograph. If it's a well-known person, like in our first book, we have a picture of Countess Markovich, and she's wearing a Republican uniform. And she's pictured with two gentlemen. We were contacted by some of the family of one of the gentlemen in the picture to give an indication what eye color he had and so on. But it's easier with famous people because you can go back and you look at records. They might have traveled, Countess Markovich did the trip to the US, and you were able to see what eye color and hair color she had and so on. And you then would know also what kind of uniforms typically the colors of those uniforms would have been. There's a picture on the right hand side here. You can see it's of some British soldiers at an eviction. And again, there'll be lots of records and pictures and paintings and books describing, you know, uniform colors and lapels and the chevrons and so on. So you can get a good indication of the types of colors that might be used or worn in certain scenarios. And then there might be, you know, there's another picture we have of Oscar Wilde, and again, there will be records of Oscar Wilde, what clothes he might have worn in various interviews. You can kind of base some of the colorizations on. It won't be perfect, but at least you have an idea of the types of things that might have been worn. More generally, in certain eras, there would be certain types of clothes that might have been used. There's lots of information on the types of dyes used in certain areas, what they're made from, whether it's, you know, bark or crotchy or berries, or, you know, different types of things that the dyes would have been made from. And as I said, you know, travel records, paintings, all of this can be used to add more information to a picture and give a more accurate, as I say, won't be 100%, but it'll be closer to perhaps what it would be from a just default AI output. I should say that a lot of the colorization systems kind of give you a average output, let's say, in terms of clothes. And you'll see a kind of lot of sort of, you know, purpley, bluey tinges in some of the AI colorizations you'll see online. And then you would probably try and go and add some more variety or randomness, or maybe even some knowledge based on types of dyes used at the time. And then, as I said, depending on the type of detail in the picture, there might be people, it might be crowds, it might be hands, it might be faces you want to kind of go and colorize. And it is essentially going around with your, I don't want to say your marker, but it's you know, a lot of colorizers will use kind of Wacom tablet and a pen, which you can't see in my video because it's been blanked out. But a Wacom digital tablet is something used by a lot of colorizers. It's essentially just a pen, and you have a little tablet you draw on to, you know, color in around the lines. So, you know, I mentioned records. This is a picture of a famous Republican, the O'Reilly, who you probably might have seen last year. The house he used to live in Dublin was destroyed despite many efforts. But this is a travel record for him going to the States, and it mentions his hair color and his eye color. Sometimes you find if, you know, you look at one travel record, it may say one thing, and you look at another travel record, it may say another thing. So you might actually want to look at a couple of them and kind of average out, you know, it might say blue in one place and maybe gray or green in another place. And you're trying to kind of figure out, well, you know, what is it, and come up with some sort of best guess based on that. But it's usually a good indicator of types of colors for someone's hair and eyes and so on. So it's quite useful to help us. This is a picture of Titanic. So again, it would be one where a lot of people would know the colors from records, from models. This is a picture taken by Robert Welch, who is a prolific photographer from Belfast, and has some amazing pictures in Northern Ireland, but also around the country. In the University of Galway, we have a fabulous album of photographs taken by Robert Welch, which was donated to Balfour on the completion, or on the construction project for the Galway-Clifton railway line. So it was a thank you from the people of Connemara to Balfour for getting this project in progress. And the pictures are all by Robert Welch. So anyway, this is a nice one of tugboats pulling out the Titanic from Belfast. And I think there's 5 boats. We can only see 2 of them here, but again, it's a nice picture. This is another picture I did, which is Amelia Earhart. I was actually fortunate enough to see the plane in question in the Smithsonian in Washington, DC, about 4 years ago actually. And as pre-COVID, and used the colors from the little red bus, as they call it, to colorize this picture. This is when Amelia Earhart landed in Derry. So again, the Irish connection there as well. So that's a nice picture from the National Library of Ireland. And as I said, context, any kind of information you can find on uniforms and so on. This is a picture of another famous aviator, Mary Heath from Limerick. And this is one of her many planes, which again would have done some research into, looking for logos and colors and so on. But the guy in uniform, I suppose uniforms are something you can usually try and get a good approximation for colors in. And I found out it was a Dutch soldier, and I found a picture in an online museum, so I was able to use those colors to colorize this soldier on the left hand side. Couple pictures from Northern Ireland. These are from Strabane, from one of the big floods they had around 1912, I believe. Yeah, 1912. And again, you know, just I think in color probably a lot more obvious in terms of the hardship and the strife that was caused by this particular event. So, you know, there's a couple pictures in the first book of you know, families either through tragedies or living in poverty that I feel anyway, and I think a lot of other people feel, bringing to life in color makes a huge impact in terms of us emotionally as well. So the Beatles, this is the Beatles performance in Northern Ireland. Again, I would have done some research into the colors of their guitars, their drum kits, which are still in the museum, and hair colors and so on, to get a kind of more accurate colorization here as well. So nice Irish connection as well, because many of them had Irish ancestry as well, as it happens. This is a picture actually of my own great grandfather. He was from County Donegal, and it's a picture of him with some of his children. My grandfather is in this picture, but it's again, I just put it in here as an example of what can be done in terms of colorization now, because I haven't actually touched this up in Photoshop. I don't think I've touched it up at all. Actually, it's been passed through a new system, which I'll talk about later on, a new AI colorization system. But it's just an example of having to do more. Like, we know that, or we believe he had a red beard, so you would go back and kind of make adjustments to small features like that. I probably would go and maybe make the blue sailor uniforms a bit more consistent, change some of the colors of the outfits, because they're all looking a little bit bluish. I can see some hands there that haven't been fully colorized, but at first glance, it's a great automated colorization of an old photograph. He was the master of the Glenties Workhouse, a very difficult place and very difficult job as well, as you can imagine. So anyway, it's just a very striking picture that something I'll be doing some more work with again. Some links to DeOldify. Again, we can make these available later on. There's a commercial version of it, which is through a heritage website, ancestry website called MyHeritage. There is a couple of links to colorized pictures for free, or videos for free. And I've also got a YouTube video. If you just Google for DeOldify and tutorial, it's the first thing that will come up anyway on YouTube. And then, as I said, you can download the code if you're brave enough to install it yourself, install it on your own machine to do mass colorization and so on. But that's one part of the puzzle. Let's say, you know, post-processing in Photoshop or other applications is a big part of the work that's required as well. And usually I use a Wacom tablet. You can use a mouse. You can do all the stuff on your own computer, but you know, it's nothing that I don't think anyone could not do a certain amount of colorization without very quickly, without much instruction. Really, it's quite straightforward. A lot of these systems are kind of drag and drop, where you drag a black and white picture onto the browser and you get a colorized version straight away. The whole broader area of AI and images, you know, there's so much happening at the moment. I was trying out a new system, relatively new anyway, on a website last week called the AI Time Machine, and it basically takes your photograph and it puts you into different eras of time. Let's say prehistoric warrior, a Celt, a secret agent, you know, a French nobleman. So it takes 10, 15 pictures of yourself, and then it kind of puts you into all these different, you know, guises, let's say, or avatars. It is good practice, I think, to make people aware of when a photograph has been colorized. These systems like DeOldify, they typically add a little color palette to the bottom of a photograph to show that it has been colorized. And I just showed the picture here going through different stages of AI. Original black and white on the left, the colorized version in the middle. I don't think this has gone through any touching up in Photoshop. And the last picture is a enhancement tool, which basically can enhance facial features, make things sharper, add more resolution to hair and so on. So you can see the difference as it goes through the different systems as well. Problem is now that it's become so difficult to know if a picture is real or a picture is not real. And these are two examples from a system called This Person Does Not Exist, which is just a website developed by a guy called Phil Wang, which uses the GANs I talked about earlier on, the type of neural network, to automatically generate random faces. So if you want to create a whole bunch of fake social media profiles or LinkedIn profiles, no better website to go to, because you just keep refreshing, it keeps generating new images. And I think to a human, you would find it quite difficult to figure out what's real and what isn't from many of these. You probably saw there was an article in the mainstream media last week about comparing computer generated art to real art, and sometimes even the art experts couldn't tell the difference. They were picking the AI generated one instead of the real one. So it's becoming more and more difficult, and probably will continue to do so in the future. There's a whole bunch of newer colorization platforms. A great one is called Palette.fm. You can do colorization free. This is the same Beatles picture I showed you earlier on, run through Palette. So again, it would need further processing to make the colors more historically accurate, but again, it's a great first go. It gives you free colorization for low resolution images. And the other system, then Photoshop, have actually built in colorization into their Photoshop platform, where you can just click on an image and generate a color version. It's not perfect. It's good for kind of close-ups of faces and so on. But again, I think compared to where things were 5 years ago, it's just amazing what can be done now as well. So I have a whole bunch of other systems here that can be used for other types of image enhancements, for enhancing videos, for enhancing pictures. And again, we'll have links to these later on, but just, it's quite fascinating what can be done with video, with images, in the whole area of enhancement. And I'm happy to answer any questions about that later on. I've also started to develop a big interest in archiving pictures themselves, and I have started to acquire a collection of thousands of images, and I've been gradually digitizing these. They're shared online on a website called the Breslin Archive, and there's probably about 600 images available there from around the country. But again, it's a learning process in terms of what's the best practices in terms of digitization, how big or how small should the images be, how do you clean them, how do you decide what to include and not to include, and so on. And I've actually started typing up a kind of a workflow in terms of what I do to get these online, because it's not just the scanning of the picture, but you're trying to gather as much information around the photograph in terms of when it was taken, where it was taken, maybe even a Google Map link if you can. So I've written a kind of a document which I must put online later on, which kind of describes the process of going from the physical artifact to having it on Flickr, which is a photo sharing website, and another system called Omica, which is a kind of a museum archive site. And to make the process as kind of streamlined as possible, so all the metadata, or all of the information on where it is and when it is and who's in it, is part of that process as well along the way. So I could talk about that ad infinitum as well, but I better leave it there. I think we're at 40-ish minutes, and yeah, I'm very happy to answer any questions. And again, thanks to Mike and to Engineers Ireland for inviting me along today. And yeah, it's been great to talk to you about this, and we'll hopefully get some interesting colorizations emerging as a result of today's talk, and we'll be looking forward to seeing your outputs online as well. So thank you, everyone.